I mean, who doesn't love it when someone finds a way around the rulebook? I know I say this pretty much every time I look at one of these hacks that somehow find a particular team another few tenths, but there's only so many times you can open a video with, I like Formula 1 and engineering, and when a team finds a loophole and exploits it, I like that a lot. So yeah, I like Formula 1 and engineering, and when a team finds a loophole and exploits it, I like that a lot. And in the late 2000s and into the early 2010s, it seemed that there was a loophole being exploited nearly every year, leaving teams scrambling to copy a design or be left floundering as they don't have the necessary cash to copy the designs that the big boys are running. I've been watching too much Resident Evil 4 remake footage recently because, as I wrote that, all I could think of was, "Not enough cash, stranger." But it is true. In 2009, there was the absolute storm surrounding the double diffuser and its legality, a loophole in the rules that the likes of Ross Brawn & Co had warned the FIA would end up being developed in some way, as the rules left a massive hole fit for exploitation. And then everybody seemed surprised when Braun, Williams and Toyota all turned up with those magic diffusers on the backs of their cars, and everybody cried that they weren't allowed to do it. You were warned. Then in 2010, McLaren turned up with its F-duct that ended up being utterly dangerous, as there were copycat designs on the grid that had the system operated by the drivers using their hands to cover the hole that activated the system, while potentially using the other hand to operate switches in the cockpit, such as the ones that changed the front wing angle. The McLaren system allowed Jensen and Lewis to have both hands on the wheel, or at the very least one hand on the wheel at all times, while others went with the more dangerous option, presumably on purpose to get the thing banned. So at the end of the 2010 season, the F-duct was banned and replaced by an FIA-approved and spec DRS system that many people have come to hate in the 12 or so years it's been in use. The Mercedes team tried a double DRS system that was also banned, and with the banning of double diffusers at the end of the 2010 season, the teams were looking at other ways of keeping their rear glued to the track. And that was due to how the cars of that time were designed. When the rules changed in 2009, out were the cars that had aero appendages sticking out of every possible surface, and in were these cars that had a much smoother bodywork appearance. What the FIA also changed is that the rear wing was very narrow, all done to reduce rear end downforce and reduce the turbulent air for cars behind. Meanwhile, the front wing was very chonky, because the FIA had figured out that most of the downforce was being generated in the centre of the front wing from that U-shaped part of the 2008 wings, and then basically just banned those bits. TLDR is, the way it was all done in the rules meant that to generate any downforce comparable to 2008 was that the wing had to be that wide. As far as I understand it anyway. But for the 2010 season, Red Bull's designer Adrian Newey decided to take the car design in a specific way to make the most of the double diffuser before its inevitable illegality, and then started to fiddle with where the exhaust should be placed to get the maximum amount of rear grip. On the 2010 RB6, the exhausts were moved closer to the floor, so that hot exhaust gases could be spat over the parts of the diffuser and supplement the rest of the air going over it, particularly at slower speeds when the air isn't going over as fast. Now, just as a note here, this is an R Factor 1 mod, so the model isn't exact, but hopefully it serves as a decent illustration. Red Bull knew that the other teams would pick up on this as soon as it was apparent that what they were doing worked, so they tried to trick the other teams by placing stickers that looked like exhausts in the section where they used to be. Another place where Red Bull had an early advantage is they told Renault what it was they were planning to do, and Renault started working out its engine maps in such a way that the exhaust would be blown off throttle to help produce the downforce it needed. If the driver kept a little bit of the throttle open, the exhaust gases would blow over the diffuser at slow speed to supplement the air that would normally be going over it and produce more downforce than it otherwise would be. Now, it has to be said here that this isn't a Red Bull discovery / invention / innovation. Back in the 90s, teams had been playing with types of blown diffusers, and the earliest example of an exhaust blown diffuser is the 1983 Renault, which I'm guessing was a reaction to the banning of ground effect. Benetton apparently had a system in 1994 and in 1995. The Williams FW17, designed by Newey, also had one until the Portuguese Grand Prix, while McLaren, Jordan and Tyrrell had some sort of setup during 1996. Difference was with these blown diffusers that they required the driver to have some sort of throttle input, while Renault had developed their engine maps to blow the hot air while off the throttle, such as in the trail braking phase. Now, as an aside here, I'm saying supposedly because everything written online is "I heard that," which usually means it's a load of rubbish. But an engineer at Ligier said how he used Schumacher's telemetry to show how best to make use of the diffusers, because Schumacher had worked out how much he needed to keep the throttle open to get the most out of his blown diffuser, and then used that data to get Olivier Panis used to using an exhaust blown diffuser. Newey does talk about it in his book though, How to Build a Car. He says that the last time he'd seen one was on the FW16 in 1994, and he'd asked Renault at the time to see if they could rig up a way of blowing gases off throttle using spark cut and other things. But it also says in the book that these diffusers were banned after Ratzenberger and Senna, so I mean, I don't know, maybe Adrian's memory's a little hazy. It does say in the book that Damon lost his dad in a racing accident, so I'm probably going to say yes. It was a plane crash, for reference. I mean, he was flying back from a test, but it wasn't strictly a racing. Anyway, from what I can tell, they weren't so much banned, but just fell out of favour because of fuel consumption, temperatures, and the engineering work required to get it to work properly. Either way, the other teams picked up on it and tried their own versions of it with varying levels of success. Ferrari tried a similar method to Red Bull, but couldn't get as much out of the system as Red Bull could. And Red Bull's head start was so great, it wasn't until the European Grand Prix, 9 rounds into that season, that Ferrari debuted their own blown diffusers. Ferrari had actually tested theirs as part of a filming day at Fiorano to dodge the in-season testing rules. And the FIA was watching all of this and had pretty much deemed the blown diffuser to be some sort of black magic, and they were working out ways to get rid of it so they could dig a hole so deep they could hand them over to Satan personally. The FIA did change the rules for the 2011 season. Double diffusers were banned outright, and they also changed the rules regarding exhaust placement, thinking that this would get rid of those evil blown diffusers. So the FIA was immediately left clenching its fist and getting ready to throw ham when Red Bull, McLaren and Lotus all turned up with designs to get around their new rule. McLaren, for all intents and purposes, over-engineered theirs and it never survived testing. Lotus, on the other hand, decided it would be a cool idea to have the exhaust come out of the front of the car and then be routed round to become the blown diffuser. This also failed in the grand scheme of things. Martin Brundle said it sounded like a bag of nails, a claim that David Coulthard disproved by actually buying a bag of nails and jangling them. I think this is also the year the side pod exploded. Was it Heusinkveld at Australia? Was that it? Red Bull, meanwhile, had just done the sensible thing and just found a loophole in the rules. While the FIA had tried its hardest to prevent the use of blown and double diffusers, Newey had managed to exploit a hole in the rulebook that allowed him to have stuff in the outer 5 centimeters of the diffuser, and that's where he stuck the exhaust to once again take advantage of the exhaust gases being blown over the diffuser and keeping it stuck to the ground off throttle. What Red Bull did is take the exhaust, flatten them, and then fired the gases between the tyre and the diffuser. So once again, these exhausts were very close to the floor, and this combined with Renault's engine mapping added up to produce that distinctive noise that blown diffusers gave that year. That distinctive sound that was, well, like an air compressor, because that's basically how the engine was functioning. This cold blowing was not something the FIA liked, but they couldn't do anything because there was nothing in their own rulebook that said it was illegal. What was happening here is that the engine was still blowing gases out of the back without the engine actually doing any driving, and with the way it was all hooked up, they'd get about 75% of the exhaust pressure they'd have at full throttle. They wanted to ban it mid-season, but all the teams protested. At the same time, some of the top teams started hot blowing by cutting the ignition when the driver came off the throttle, but fuel still went in. The fuel then ignited on the hot exhaust and then became supercharged gas that went over the diffuser and prevented that on or off style of the older blown diffusers, something that was quite the problem in the 90s. This wasn't something they do all the time. It looks like it was mainly a qualifying thing, as doing it too much damages the engine and also uses more fuel. For 2012, the FIA said, right, this is where you're putting your exhausts, and cars like the Red Bull RB8 ended up having the exhausts pretty much where they had been before, this time in a designated box that the FIA had given the designers to work with. Red Bull lost out the most, but this is Formula 1. They just figure out the next way around things. And Red Bull did, winning another 2 constructors and drivers doubles. So then, a look at the blown diffuser revolution in Formula 1. If this is something that you remember, then do leave memories down in the comments. And if you like the video, do give it a like for the algorithm. And for more stuff like this, get subscribed and also get the bell on too, so you never miss out on anything I do here. Massive thanks to the kind folk over at Patreon, and if you want to help keep things running around here, then a Patreon link as well as Discord, socials and F1 Store affiliate link are all in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.